What's cooking, my babies? All right, today's video is choosing to interpret events rather favorably for ourselves. I'm sure this is from an anime. I'm sure. But, here, literally, let me show you. Choosing to interpret events rather favorably for ourselves. Uh, Not sure if this is selfishness. Not sure if this is a selfish approach that's negative for you, or a positive approach that's that's good for your vision, right? Because we always kind of see people trying to explain situations in a more putting a positive spin on things. Let's use that. So, yes, choosing to interpret events rather favorably for ourselves is a very selfish thing. I think it's necessary. Now, what does that say about us? Do we have this kind of like big egocentric view of ourselves, maybe? Because the choice to do that isn't okay. So, like, I always used to say there are a million excuses to do something, but there's only one reason, which means there's only one thing that makes sense and that truly contributed to what happened, right? Because everything else is an excuse except for the reason why it became. Weirdly so, this reason is very subjective, very, very, very subjective. Because I can start with the excuses that are beyond me, and eventually it starts coming closer. And at one point, I have a choice. I can choose to take responsibility and basically deliver on a reason that fits my position in it. And that responsibility could be on either side of the spectrum because I could be very much involved why something happened, or it could just be my passivity, which is also an involvement. But like the responsibility you're taking is either like I took an action and I'm responsible for that action, which was the reason for something to happen, or I didn't take an action, which was the reason for something to happen, and everything in between. The reason this popped in my mind is ultimately because when we're looking at the event, we're normally looking at the outcome of the event. We're not necessarily reflecting on the event itself, are we? Because our choice to interpret events rather favorably for ourselves is due to the fact that we have uh, we have taken the storyline and adjusted it to make more sense for us. So we're not really looking at the truth, are we? Or the truth of what happened. But can we ever, right? Because ultimately, uh, if we are find ourselves admitting to the event to not be truthful, that means that's not the truth that we see. Now, something happened and that's factual, but the truth behind it is very much subject to a negotiation because every standpoint sees it differently. So again, let's go back to the intention behind the choice, the choosing to interpret events rather favorably for ourselves. I definitely think it's something that we always should do, but that also could make us fall into the trap of I think self-involvement, right? Because like effectively what starts happening is all we're doing is noticing ourselves in a situation instead of noticing whatever else is there. I might sound like I'm rambling, but I'll read it again. Choosing to interpret events rather favorably for ourselves. What could be the intention behind? All right, so if it's an event that has nothing to do with me, the minute I'm involved, I'm given the choices of interpreting it anytime I want. Choosing to interpret events rather favorably for me is a way of showing myself respect, right? I'm not going to say it's a thin line because ultimately what I could end up doing is like feeding my ego, which is always the case because ultimately I need to build the ego in a way that sustains me to the position where I am able to fulfill my vision or whatever it is I'm intentional on achieving, right? Is this a projection into the future or is my intention a response of what I want? Now I'm separating the intention because I'm either intending for something to come out of something, which is something that I don't want and would rather not want. But I'm always in the process of exploring my reality and expressing it into the world. So my intention is basically what's causing my reality to become a thing. And in order for me to express it into the world, I have to understand better how the world looks like and how my reality fits. So when I'm choosing to interpret events rather favorably for me, it's because I'm using that view of the events that occurred in order for my expression to make more sense. Or else what I'll find myself doing is neglecting slash ignoring the current situation. Or at the very least, not utilizing the situation or the event that happened, regardless if it's a positive or a negative event. Not using it and basically, I want to say building on top of it. But the truth is, what I find myself doing is probably I'm wasting a resource, aren't I? Because every event that happens in the day is something you build upon. And if it's not something you build upon, it's something that, like, it's that gap, right? Of something that you could have done, but you didn't. So it leaves your journey kind of like with empty slots, which means you weren't really present because you're ignoring it. Or it kind of like consumes your energy, which means your growth or movement or journey is moving slower simply because you kind of like didn't give it the attention it deserved, or just probably left it to its own will, which allowed it to kind of like scramble into your mind and include itself in things that are not there. Imagine it's one way for us to be building our ego and creating the structure that's malleable enough. The reason I used malleable, not strong, is because strength kind of like expresses rigidity. But malleable kind of means that it could be bent to any other way, but ultimately, like, yeah, it's like the difference between malleable and well, what's the rubber thing? Because it comes back into place. Yeah, it's not the rubber thing. What I'm thinking about is the difference between a plastic ruler and when you bend it, it comes back into place, and a steel wire that you can bend it into different shapes and sizes, shapes and forms. But I think malleable works because ultimately, uh, again, considering our ego as the element that we use to express ourselves, we kind of want different bits and pieces to exist in order for us to build on top of them. So it's like that single Lego where you build 10 on top of it, but the base is single. And that's, I think, I feel that's how we explore into this world. It's because we kind of like, there's an event that happened and we kind of like expand and we transform to include it. It doesn't have to be a big transformation, but it's a core of something that if another thing happens in the future, we already have this experience. And so I stick with the choice because ultimately, like, the expression of my intention needs to be delivered, and the feedback we get, I'm not saying change the event, but interpret it. It's not about looking at the event and going like, or and not seeing it for what it is. It's seeing it for what it is and interpreting it in a way that allows us to express. That way, we're actually taking the truth behind it in order for us to build the ego. And our interpretation kind of like adds the value to our mind in order for the processes for such an event, if it occurs again or something similar to occur again, to be dealt with beforehand differently or just handled. I'm also right now considering the difference. Like if we're choosing a bad event and we're interpreting it for our favor, favorably for ourselves, then effectively we might promote sad or bad events. But we're looking at the truth behind it, which allows us to kind of like consider the different things that could happen between us and the event and how they occur. There's a lot more depth to this than I'm actually giving it credit for, but I'm sure it's going to come back again in a couple extra videos. Thank you guys. Fucking love you. That's a video. Bye.